A few months ago, I had gathered with some interfaith colleagues, many of them men from evangelical branches of Christianity, and they were sharing about their lives and their faith. But something was happening within myself, because their sharing felt like sandpaper on my heart. I was so bothered by it, and for a long while I couldn't put words to it other than we differed in our systems of belief. One day it clicked. The language of God as Father, Lord, and King, stories of male priests and pastors and prophets sent into the world to do God's work, there was no room for me, a woman. I wondered how it would be possible for them to understand me as divine too. What was missing was theology, spelled with an A theology of the divine feminine. Thankfully, as a Unitarian Universalist, there are many images of the sacred, theist and secular, of all genders, except we too don't always make it explicitly welcome. On the 8th of March, we recognize International Women's Day, where this year's theme is embracing equity. And so today I want to create a space for a feminist view of religion, stories of goddesses from around the world. In the late 1960s, Carol P. Christ attended Yale Graduate School, where she studied religion. She was told by classmates and professors that she would never graduate with a PhD, and if by chance she did, she also wouldn't be able to find a job because it would be given to a man who needed it more than she did, because he would have a family to feed. Outside of her studies, she encountered sexism as male students placed bets on where she would sit, commented on her body, and she couldn't use the bathroom in the library where she studied because there was only one, and it was labeled as a men's bathroom. The only other female student in her class was a nun, and she didn't interact with the other students. Throughout her Christian studies, she also encountered theologians who supported this train of thought, and they were not questioned. St. Thomas Aquinas, a well-respected theologian even to this day, wrote, "Women have inferior reasoning capacity. As a consequence, she was not considered capable of virtuous activity. A woman becomes virtuous by placing herself in obedience to a virtuous man." End quote. We can easily dismiss this by saying he was a 13th century theologian. His views would be consistent with that time and place. And yes, that is true. And it erases the harm that has happened from that dominant narrative, the one that led to the goddess having her history stolen from her. Carol Christ wasn't the only one engaged in this work, even though she felt alone in her academic setting. Later, she encountered the work of Starhawk, who taught a class about the goddess and her connection to nature. And Mary Daly also became a prominent and important influence with her book, Beyond God the Father, Toward a Philosophy of Women's Liberation. Anthropologist Clifford Geertz argues that all religions are sets of symbols which shape a cultural ethos. This defines the deepest values of a society and the persons within it. Therefore, religion, as a system of symbols, produces powerful, pervasive, long-lasting moods and motivations in a given culture. Let's break that down. Moods are a psychological attitude, things like trust, respect, and awe, while motivation is a social and political trajectory. The absent stories of the goddess has led to a society that doesn't recognize female power and inherent goodness. And we continue to live with the consequences of the erasure of the feminine divine as women still struggle for equity. Unitarian Universalism responded to all of this in that time with religious education curricula, including Cakes for the Queen of Heaven, and more recently, Rise Up and Call Her Name. Even with all of this, we still haven't learned the lesson. Early feminism argued for women's rights while leaving out those of non-binary, trans, and gender non-conforming folks who were not included in the conversation. We all need the goddess in her thousands of faces. We need all the images and stories of the sacred that invite an expansive view of the world, the kinds that comfort us and those that shake us up. And so let's engage with some of these ancient stories that remind us that our understanding of the world continues to grow larger as we draw the circle wider and wider still. You may already be familiar with the story of Persephone, the Greek goddess of the underworld. Also known as Kore, the maiden, she was the daughter of Demeter. In her myth, Persephone was in the field picking flowers one day when she was abducted by Hades, the god of the underworld. In some versions, this abduction was permitted by her father, Zeus. Her mother, though, was beside herself. She searched everywhere for her daughter. In her grief and her anger for her missing daughter, Demeter forbade the earth from producing flowers and crops. This speaks to a fierce love between a mother and child. Demeter would do anything to have her daughter return. In the myth, Zeus does force Hades to return Persephone, but first, Hades plays a little trick. He gives Persephone a pomegranate seed, because anyone who eats in the underworld is bound there. And so a deal had to be struck. Since it was only a seed, Persephone would spend half of the year with the gods above and the remaining part of the year in the underworld. This myth is said to explain the changing seasons, beginning with a new cycle of growth, as well as death and the regeneration of life. Pachamama is the Mother Earth goddess of the Andean people, a fertility goddess who embodies mountains, the goddess of planting and the harvest. If you've seen images of Pachamama, they include luscious mountains covered in green, and sometimes a mountain with a deep cave inside. Pachamama teaches us to live in harmony with the earth and avoid taking too much. For it's said that if you do, you better be warned that she is also the force behind the earthquakes. And so regular offerings are given to Pachamama throughout the harvest season, especially potatoes and cocoa leaves, with the hope that the harvest be plentiful. Cailleach, a Celtic goddess, appears as a veiled older woman. Her skin pale, her teeth red, and her clothes adorned with skulls. Don't underestimate her appearance, because she is also known to ride the storms, leap over mountains, and even transform into a bird. Because of this association with the storms, she is a naturally wild and destructive force. Some have even associated her with the winter season, and so as farmers take in the last sheaf of grain harvested, it is dedicated to her. And it's also this same sheaf that begins the next planting season. Much of her myth has been lost, but rituals in her name have lived on. Here's one you'll probably find somewhat familiar. On Imbolc, the midpoint between the winter solstice and the first day of spring, the story goes that Cailleach runs out of firewood for the winter, and so she needs to go out in search for more wood. If she wishes the winter to last longer, the day is sunny and bright, and so she can go out and engage in that search, returning to the warmth of her hearth fire. But if the day is stormy and gray, it's said that she has overslept, and winter will come to an early end. I don't remember on February 2nd what the weather was, and I didn't look it up. Oshun is the goddess of love for the Yoruba people. She is one of the most powerful Orisha, or gods, of the traditional Yoruba religion. Oshun is a powerful black goddess who was involved in the creation of humanity. As the story goes, male gods attempted to create humans, but failed in all of their attempts. It was her life-giving waters that helped make it possible. Oshun is also known to be angry, and when she does, the world floods. So they too have a flood myth. Because of her connection to these living waters, she's also known as the protective deity of the river Oshun in Nigeria, which is next to a sacred grove and remains a holy site for the Yoruba people today. And she covenanted with the people. She said, "You can set up your homes along the shores of the river, and I will protect you, so long as you continue to worship me." And to this day, the Oshun festival is practiced with its traditional river dance. Aphrodite, a Greek god, I know, patience with me, is the son of Hermes and Aphrodite. In this myth, he falls in love with a nymph named Salamacis, I might be mispronouncing that, who wanted to be united with him forever. And the prayer was answered when the two of them were bathing in the river and their bodies merged as one. I share his story because the images of Aphrodite depict a female figure with breasts, a narrow waist, long hair, sometimes up in a bun, and wearing women's clothing. Statues of this female figure are shown lifting up the hems of the skirt to reveal a penis and testes. Later, he became known as Hermaphroditus. But this depiction of an ancient Greek god is a reminder that sex and gender are complex and beautiful. In this form, we are reminded that each of us is a reflection of the divine. These are but a few of the many expressions of the sacred feminine and those who are gender nonconforming, whose stories have been and continue to be shared. These are the stories that people have encountered elements in them of themselves. They saw themselves reflected in these stories. And this is important because this is a world in which many people struggle to recognize in themselves and in each other that first principle of inherent worth and dignity. But these stories have lived on. So what is it about them that makes them so powerful that they have lasted throughout the ages? What truth do they touch upon that remains important for us in this moment in time? What about them speaks to us in ways that gives us hope, that challenge and inspire us? The goddess who takes on many forms, her stories, a multiplicity of experiences. For me, they form a cloud of witnesses. I appreciate that I can find in these expressions of the divine such strong emotions, including love and anger. Female-identified folks in our culture are often taught not to express their anger, and if they do, they're given a not-so-kind label, not really appropriate to share at the pulpit. I can say penis, but I can't say that. Welcome to Unitarian Universalism. These stories contain examples of reverence for nature, deep love between parent and child, where age is no limitation for divine nature, and race and gender expression excludes no one from divinity. People of ancient times may have felt that they needed these goddesses. They needed their support for the harvest, ones who would give them strength and blessing for the difficulties of their day. Today, we are the ones who need these goddesses and their many siblings. We are the ones who benefit from knowing that we too are represented in these ancient stories as part of the sacred cosmos. Even if these goddesses are not your personal expression of the sacred, it is my hope that you have encountered something about yourself in these ancient stories. May we work towards equity as we remember and retell these stories, sharing what is revealed to us through myth and legend. And we close with the final paragraphs from The Charge of the Goddess by Doreen Valiente. All acts of love and pleasure are my ritual. Let there be beauty and strength, power and compassion, honor and humility, mirth and reverence within you. And you who think to seek for me, know that your seeking and yearning shall avail you not unless you know this mystery. If that which you seek you find not within yourself, you shall never find it without. For behold, I have been with you from the beginning, and I am that which is attained at the end of all desire. Blessed be, and amen.